Hi, welcome back to this program, the Business Portal. This is your host for this segment, Trend Analysis, Toti Casino. Lately, we've been watching on television this crisis going on in the Middle East. Started with the Tunisian change of government and then followed by Egypt, where they ousted President Mubarak. And now, the crisis apparently has spread in the rest of the Middle East, primarily in areas of Bahrain, Yemen, Libya. And with these changes, a lot of things that's being aired on the news is constitutional reform. A few weeks ago, we had a guest from Get Real Philippines, and we discussed about constitutional reform. We have them back on this program to discuss further on what does constitutional reform have to do with this crisis. So with us is none other than Orion Perez Dumdum. Welcome back to our show.
Thank you very much for having me here, Toti.
Yeah. So why is it that with all this crisis going on, constitutional reform seems to be what is being uttered by this constituent, these protesters?
Okay, well, most of the countries in the Middle East actually have a form of government that is what they see, what is seen to be repressive or monopolizes a lot of power, doesn't really get to listen so much to inputs from the people. And many of these countries that are going through trouble right now, they have what is essentially a presidential system. And some of those that have a non-presidential system, like say Bahrain, for example, actually have something that is similar to it, albeit in a monarchical setting.
Okay.
So they are actually a monarchy instead of a civilian, commoner type republic.
When you say with a monarchy, is that more authoritarian?
It's like an authoritarian system, actually. I have actually a slide that I can show later on, which I showed last time as well, which shows how it is that absolute monarchies are actually side by side with despotisms and dictatorships.
Okay.
And then you have all these interim levels or interim types of government which go all the way to the most evolved form, the most representative form, which is a parliamentary system. So you have a very absolutist form of government, and then you have a very representative type of government down below. This is the most grassroots based.
All right.
The other one is concentrated in just one person.
Okay.
So that can be in two forms. One is either a monarchical hereditary form, and the other one is in a so-called modern non-traditional form.
All right. Now you said these governments, Tunisia, Egypt, Libya, except Bahrain, and then Yemen, they're all presidential?
They're all presidential.
And they have been run by the one leader for the longest time.
For the longest time.
Like Libya has been run by
Muammar Gaddafi.
For 42 years. And then
Very
you
long
have
time.
Egypt being run by Mubarak for
30
plus years, and
30
so
plus
the
years,
president of Tunisia. But is it presidential like our presidential system where you get to elect the president?
For the most part, they are based on that system supposedly, except that there have always been these allegations of rigging. So that's the main thing. And for the most part, a lot of them have been asking that more powers be devolved from the president to the parliament, which is more representative.
But did we do that during the time that we had people power in 1986? We changed the constitution from what was then the 1973 constitution, which was a parliamentary constitution, into a presidential system. But how did they define during the time of under the Marcos administration, where we had a pseudo parliamentary system?
Yeah, that's a good term to use, because in fact it was a pseudo parliamentary system. The real truth of the matter was the 1973 Constitution of the Philippines was really supposed to be a parliamentary system. That's what it was meant to be on paper. Unfortunately, it was happening during the time of martial law.
Yeah.
And so when that happened, right after the ratification of the 1973 Constitution, you ended up having all these other amendments that came up. These amendments basically, I think that was in 1976, there was like a series of, there was a set of different amendments, which essentially reaffirmed that the power was going to be really with the president. Before that, right after 1973's ratification of the Constitution, the president still had most of the power, and then because he was exercising that martial law powers,
right.
emergency powers, and there was no interim prime minister. There was no one to be prime minister at that time. So he essentially, ex-President Marcos, the late President Marcos, was actually, for all intents and purposes, both the prime minister and the president at the same time.
But the one that gave him the legitimacy to run the country when he declared martial law was the 1935 Constitution.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
Which gave any president who declares martial law to have
Emergency powers.
emergency powers. But then his term was supposed to expire in 72.
Yes, that's right.
And then he declared martial law in 72. Then he had the 1973 Constitution ratified. Are you saying that the 1935 Constitution was the Constitution, the kind of form of government that he used to keep himself in power?
It was the, I would say that the 1935 Constitution was what allowed him to get the power.
Okay.
And
then he changed it.
And then he changed it,
to
yeah.
the 1973 Constitution.
Yeah. There are a lot of speculations as to what exactly happened. There are many people who are saying that with the 1973 Constitution, actually, it didn't go how he wanted it to be. Because, I mean, he would have wanted, that's what some people are saying, he would have wanted something that would have given him more powers. But then what came out was a parliamentary system. And in reality, a parliamentary system does not really give you absolute supreme powers over other people. Basically, if you are the prime minister, you are answerable to the National Assembly or the Parliament or whatever it's called.
All right.
Unfortunately, because that was happening during the time of martial law, he had supreme power.
Okay.
And at that point in time, he was both president and prime minister. It was only in 1981 when we ended up having
when martial law was lifted.
When martial law was lifted, that we ended up having a new amendment, which actually changed the system again back from a supposedly parliamentary system. It went back to being
to
a presidential
That's
system.
That's why you had the snap election of '86.
Yes. What happened in 1981 was this. Basically, after martial law, he needed to have more, to stick to having power. And, you know, if he was going to not do that set of amendments in 1981, he would have had to get a prime minister, and then that prime minister would have been the one with power.
Okay.
So he needed to change that system. So he made that amendment, which identified or defined the Philippine system as not being a pure parliamentary system, but it became a so-called French-style semi-presidential system. Okay. And in the French-style system, the prime minister is really secondary to the president. I mean, if you think about France, for example, Sarkozy, Nicolas Sarkozy, he's the one who faces the UN. He's the one who goes to all these international summits. It's not the prime minister. I mean, during the time of François Mitterrand or Jacques Chirac, you know, they were
the president.
They were presidents,
and
they had prime ministers. Like during the time of Jacques Chirac, there was Lionel Jospin. He was the prime minister, le premier ministre, but he was not the guy who was attending all these summits. And usually, I have this kind of what you would call a litmus test for finding out what sort of system is used by a particular country. You find out when there are these international summits or events, who actually faces and makes and answers to the crowd? Who answers to an international summit? When there's like a Davos summit or whatever, UN or ASEAN,
the head of state.
Who is the one who goes there? Is he the guy who's calling the shots, or is it the prime minister, or is it the president, or is it the king? Depends, right? So in the case of Brunei, for example, in ASEAN, it's the Sultan of Brunei who goes.
And he's forever the leader.
Forever the leader. At the end of the day, Brunei actually has a prime minister, but he never shows up in all these things. It's always the Sultan,
the head of state,
and it shows that actually he is the real power behind the country.
In the case of UK, you have the Queen, and you have the Prime Minister.
Yes.
And the Prime Minister, that's the one that makes representation for the state.
Absolutely. That's what happens. So that's my litmus test. I look at who actually attends all these events. So in the case of Great Britain, the UK, it's not Queen Elizabeth who goes.
Although she's the recognized.
She's a recognized ceremonial
Queen.
figurehead. Yeah. But the real decision maker is actually the Parliament itself, represented by the Prime Minister.
Okay.
And so it's the Prime Minister who actually goes to the UN or addresses all these Davos summits and things like that. The same thing when you look at, say, France. A lot of Filipinos make the mistake of thinking that France is actually some kind of a parliamentary system. In fact, it's not, because if it were a real parliamentary system, then it would have had the Prime Minister actually fronting for France. But it's not. It's always the president. It's Nicolas Sarkozy, or it was Jacques Chirac, or François Mitterrand. These were the guys who actually attended all these international events. In the case of Marcos, for example, President Marcos before, it was not Cesar Virata who was facing the international summits and all that. It was the late President Marcos himself who faced the US, who faced ASEAN, who faced all these other.
So in 81, he changed that back.
He changed it back. In many ways, and this is really the net effect of what happened with the 1973 Constitution, plus all the amendments. Instead of having a real change in system, what only happened in real effect was that the Senate was removed.
Yes.
Okay, the Senate was removed. It became unicameral.
Yeah, unicameral, right.
And then you changed all the text, meaning to say, in the old system, which was a very American-based system, which is the system we have now once again, if you are a cabinet member, a member of cabinet, you were called a secretary.
Right.
In the Marcos system, all he did was he changed it from secretary to minister.
Okay.
If you were a congressman, you were now called an assemblyman.
Yes.
Instead of being called the House of Representatives, it was called the. First, it was called National Assembly. It was later on changed to Batasang Pambansa.
Right.
And then other things, basically text changes, like department became ministry. Executive secretary became prime minister. So, in real truth.
Because it's a name change.
It was just all about name changing. I mean, Cesar Virata, he was really.
But the function and the roles did not.
They did not. Cesar Virata was still basically just the assistant to Marcos. He was the executive secretary.
Okay.
So at the end of the day, there were no real changes from the 1935 to the 1973.
In these countries that are now declaring all these crises, in Egypt, in Tunisia, Libya, Yemen, do they have the same makeup the way we had during?
Very much the same. Very much the same. In fact, their systems are a form of a French-style They look like a semi-presidential. Actually, the term is actually semi-presidential.
All right.
Semi-presidential, and so these countries, if you look at you do research on the internet, you'll find out that either they are called semi-presidential or they are called presidential. The only reason why they're called semi-presidential sometimes is because they resemble the French system. They normally call their how do you call this, legislature a parliament,
right?
Instead of calling it Congress, the way we do.
Weren't these countries before they became independent, they were subjects of the British Empire, so they had the parliamentary system?
Some of them, many of them were actually subjects of the Ottoman Empire at some point.
Okay.
They were under the Ottoman Empire,
right.
But they were actually under protectorate status in the form of, in the case of Egypt, they were khedive or something is the name of the term.
Okay.
It was a very dictatorial thing. I mean, a command and control. It's similar to like the governor general of say the Philippines under the Spaniards before or something, or under the Americans.
Let's get more on details with regards to the structure within the parliamentary. But before that, we have to pause for a break. You're tuning in here on the Trends Analysis. This is your host, Tori Casino. With us is Orion Perez Dumdum of the Get Real Philippines, and our topic for today is the Middle East crisis and constitutional reform. Do stay tuned for more information.